The commands had been traveling across the enemy lines. Any women found and captured were to face the worst fates. You knew that despite wearing the same uniform, carrying the same rifle, and fighting the same war, your fate could be worse than any man's. The efforts of women across World War II were indispensable to the war effort. From nurses to radio operators, from clerks to mechanics, from pilots to spies, the Allies could not have succeeded without them yet. Till the war's end in 1945, women on the battlefield faced the risk of capture and fates including concentration camps and execution. Today we examine what the Nazis did to female soldiers. Female soldiers were a vital arm of the armed forces in World War II. Several nations like Britain, the United States, and the had women join their armed forces, taking highly important roles like mechanics, pilots, radio operators, clerks, and nurses. Roles for women were further specialized in the capacity of spies and resistance fighters of all the nations that enlisted women into the armed forces. The Soviet Union had the largest number. It's estimated that 800,000 women served for the Russian forces, with many serving in combat, some in the role of snipers and pilots. Yet for all their courage and bravery, any armed soldier in combat faces the risk of capture and becoming a prisoner of war. Throughout the war, several women soldiers were captured by the Nazis, and many would become famous for their stories and hardships. An incredible all-women combat squadron known to their enemies as the Night Witches are among the most famous of the entire war assembled. At a time when women were barred from combat in the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin would personally contact Marina Roscoe and granted clearance to build female combat units. From late 1941, female air units were assembled, predominantly made up of volunteers in their late teens and early 20s. The Night Witches were officially the 588th the Night Bomber Regiment, whose runs required a high level of skill in operating well into enemy airspace. A famed attack technique of the regiment was to idle their engines near the targets and glide to the bomb release point using only the wind. The sound of this resembled broomsticks to German soldiers. And so was born the nickname throughout the war. The regiment would spend around 30,000 hours in flight and drop over 3,000 tons of bombs. Yet all these missions were severely dangerous, and many of these pilots were captured by the Nazis following capture of the brave fighter. Pilots were subject to the fate of concentration camps or execution. The first real confrontation the Nazis faced of women in combat came with the invasion of in June 1941, while the Russians were taken by surprise by the brazen, maniacal choice of invasion. The Germans had their own surprise in countering the Russian forces. Namely, there were plenty of women in their ranks. This was a matter that had not come the Nazis' way in their invasions and occupations of Poland, France, and Norway. Shock and a degree of disgust were the Nazi response to witnessing women carrying firearms and manning field weaponry. As much as this, though, it was the scale of female involvement that took the Nazis back. Approximately 200,000 women would be decorated for their efforts in the field, and some 89 would be given the Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest possible honor for military action. Taken aback and somewhat appalled to find all these capable women in uniforms. The German High Command took the lowest possible form of response. On the 29th June 1941, Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge would issue an infamous order that any captured women soldiers were to be shot in a clandestine turn. These were not orders given by the SS or the Gestapo, but orders issued from commanders on the field of battle. It would take some 4 months of individual commanders passing on the orders, including Field Marshal Walter von Reyna and 75th Division General Ernst Hammer, and the practice was normalized as a result. Any of the brave women on the Eastern Front had their fates sealed. Should they befall Nazi capture? Not through high command directives, but through the bigoted other attitudes of Nazi soldiers on the ground. Bereft at the idea, women could militarily serve astonishingly. The German forces invading the Eastern Front would take a staggering 6 million prisoners of war, and around half this number would die. The Geneva Convention was a piece of paper at this point, not a beacon of upheld international law. Hundreds and thousands of these prisoners were left to starve to death for an army unit that prided itself on professionalism. The Nazi forces appeared more like a collection of thugs, molded by ideology in the lens of an enemy that could barely comprehend women in uniform. The Russian women soldiers were probably the most vulnerable of POWs ordered to be shot dead upon capture. Many of the women soldiers would face substantial abuse as POWs before their lives were extinguished. Though many knew that the game was up, it is recorded and understood many of these Russian women soldiers were ready to shoot themselves before being captured and taken prisoner by the Nazi forces. These women and others like them showed great bravery and resilience in the face of enemy capture, and their stories serve as a testament to the courage and dedication of female soldiers. During World War II, Christina Scherbak would be known by many as the bravest of the brave. The Polish agent of the British Special Operations Executive worked as a courier for the Polish resistance, as well as the first serving female agent of the service. Scar was the longest serving. Her incredible espionage exploits had her traveling the depths of Nazi-occupied Europe undercover. Yet her resourcefulness and success opened the doors for female recruitment across the war. Scherbak, however, would be captured by the Gestapo, and it was only her canny mind and application of strategy that saved her from a grim fate. She and a fellow agent were arrested by Hungarian police in Budapest in January 1941. Following questioning by the Gestapo, Skube produced false symptoms of pulmonary tuberculosis to get herself freed. How did she do it? Well, she bit her tongue to make it bleed, and the doctor present promptly fell for it and gave her an incorrect diagnosis. Britain's most glamorous spy stands as one of the most outstanding women war heroes to this day. Noor Inayat Khan was a British agent who worked as a radio operator for the Special Operations Executive in France, known by many as Nora Baker. She would conduct her French resistance operation under the code name Madeleine Khan, was admired and hired for her lack of rose, and her entire philosophy behind joining the OE was a nonviolence stance she'd been brought up with. However, this nonviolence policy also brought her to some of the most dangerous positions in the war. Ultimately, Khan would be betrayed during her undercover resistance work in France. As a result, she was captured by the Gestapo in 1943, yet stood her ground till her last. She was renowned as a dangerous and uncooperative prisoner. She and 3 other women prisoners were taken to Dachau concentration camp in 1944, where they were taken to the crematorium and executed, posthumously awarded the George's Cross for her selfless bravery. A memorial bust of Inayat Khan stands in London to this very day. Whittle stands as a shining example of the fearless bravery exhibited by many women in World War II, and also the bizarre paradigm of sexism, in which such women found themselves in, after joining the U.S. Army as a nurse in June 1941. Whittle would train as a flight nurse and continued her service in the novel role. From 1943, the young concept of flight nurses was rife with peril, picking up wounded soldiers from the battlefield, attended by nurses taking in on doctors' responsibilities, all from an aircraft that could itself be shot down. Reba Whittle showed nothing but courage. In September 1943-10, Whittle's C-47 aircraft flew 40 miles off course, yet to land and pick up wounded soldiers only carrying supplies. The flight was not marked as a medical one. Whittle was flying alone into enemy territory above a German flag fire ravaged the aircraft, wounding Whittle, a pilot, and killing another. The plane would go down in German territory. And as Whittle and her crew survived and escaped, German soldiers surrounded to capture them. Only American woman to ever be captured in the European theater by the enemy. Long and short of it, the Nazis had absolutely no idea what to do with her, particularly as a prisoner of war. Ironically, this patriarchal dumbstruck may just have saved Whittle's life. After her recovery, Whittle was transferred to a hospital in SAG 9CA Nazi prison war camp, but not as a prisoner. She was put to work as a nurse. It was from there that the International Red Cross crossed paths, if you will, with Whittle, and passed on her situation to the U.S. State Department. In January 1945, Whittle was released to the Allies and returning to the U.S. Army. She was awarded the Purple Heart for her service in valor in a world where women were only underestimated. We'll see you next time.